Welcome, everybody, to the Week 1 Games Breakdown here on DraftKings TV. I'm David Kitchen, a.k.a. Socrdave, joined by three other DraftKings analysts. Andrew Wiggins goes by Makisupa. Adam Levitan goes by Adam Levitan. And Drew Dinkmeyer goes by Dinkpiece. Guys, how's it going?
Doing good. What's going on?
We're just going to get into these games. A reminder, though, I'm sure you guys have seen the commercials. $1 or $2 million to the first place prize for this week's DraftKings Millie Maker. Even if you get second place, you still get $1 million, $10 million in overall prizes. And guys, we are literally days away from the start of the season. Adam, how excited are you for this just to kind of get going?
I have 20 Tyrod Taylor lineups ready to be inserted into the Millie Maker as we speak, so I'm ready.
It's funny because I'd never pinned you as a Tyrod Taylor guy. But yeah, so we'll get right into the games. We're going to just do a game-by-game breakdown. So we'll be here for the next 45 minutes or so. Make sure for the upcoming weeks, if you have any questions, hit us up on Twitter at use hashtag DKTV. And we'll try to get to some of those questions. All right, so let's just start by going first game of the week. And unfortunately, it's not going to be in the Millie Maker contest, but it is going to be in the Thursday contest. Drew, do you have your balls inflated for this one?
This is a game that I think a lot of fantasy owners are really excited about. You've got two high-scoring, kind of fast-tempo offenses going up against one another, and both offenses are missing key pieces. So that tends to funnel and focus, concentrate those opportunities on key players. So I think you'll see in those Thursday contests, I think you'll see heavy ownership on guys like Antonio Brown, Tom Brady, and Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah, definitely. And you also mentioned it without one of those key pieces as far as suspensions go. Brady is playing. But what do you make of that running back situation, Andrew?
Well, it's a tough situation to figure out. I thought that maybe Jonas Gray was going to be in there. He started the last preseason game, and then they ended up cutting him. Blount is, of course, suspended. I'm going to just avoid the running situation for the Patriots and probably look to maybe the pass catchers like Edelman, although I'd kick it to Adam and see what's the deal with him. Is he going to play?
Yeah, I think Edelman's going to be fine. I think after this game, everybody's going to be all narrative streeted up, right? They're going to say, oh, Brady was so angry about the suspension, when in reality, he's going to light this Steelers secondary on fire because they're atrocious. So, yeah, I don't think it's narrative street with Brady. I don't think he's angrier and therefore will play better. I just think he's going to have a really, really good game because it's a really, really good spot. And I think Edelman will be really popular. I think Amendola is actually a good bet to see 6 or 7 targets in this game, given how many injuries they have at the wideout spot. So I think Amendola is a little bit sneakier, especially with their third down back situation. They let a bunch of guys go. They're going to go with Dion Lewis as their third down back, who I'm not too impressed by. So yeah, I think it's a good spot for a lot of guys in this game, but especially the Patriots kind of pass catchers.
Drew, you have to pick one person from this game that's going to be the highest owned. Who is it?
Rob Gronkowski.
Gronk?
Yeah, I'm going Gronk. I think he's the highest owned tight end. This year it's Gronk, and then everybody else, really, there's a huge gap between him and the rest of the tight ends. So I think he'll be the highest owned player in this game.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. But I'm actually excited that Brady is back because it's going to be an entertaining game. It wasn't going to be as entertaining, I feel like, without him. And we can finally get past all of the off-season storyline to start moving into football. So it'll be a great game to kind of open up. Packers at Bears is going to be the next game. Adam, I'll let you kind of talk about your overall thoughts on this game.
Yeah, I expect Aaron Rodgers to be the highest owned quarterback this week, and I don't think it'll be particularly close. I mean, there's tough spots. I would not be that high on Andrew Luck at Buffalo. I would not be that high on Drew Brees at Arizona, not high on Russell Wilson at St. Louis. So I think it's a no-brainer for Aaron Rodgers to be the highest owned quarterback. And even though he's expensive, people can fit him pretty easily given all the values. So, yeah, I expect Aaron Rodgers to have a really good game. He's expensive, but I think he'll have a really good game. And maybe his attempts won't be as much as some of the other guys because he won't need it, but his efficiency and his projected touchdowns, I think, are better than anybody else this week. And obviously everybody's going to stack him with Devontae Adams. So So yeah, just a little tip: if you're stacking Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, and they go off that's not going to be enough to win the Millie Maker. You're going to need a lot more than that.
Yeah, everyone has to kind of click to win that Millie Maker. Drew and Andrew, you guys are both Bears fans. So does that mean that you guys both really love the Packers since you kind of know how bad the Bears are?
Well, it's a good year to be playing DFS because it's not going to be a fun year as a Bears fan. But as far as this game, there might be some value there with Eddie Royal in particular because Alshon Jeffrey is banged up. I think even if he does go, I still like Eddie Royal to catch a bunch of passes. The Bears are going to almost certainly be behind. They're going to be throwing, and Eddie's really cheap. So he's one of my favorite plays this week.
Drew, how much Eddie Lacy will you have?
Unfortunately, a lot more than I'd like to have. Eddie Lacy is not one of my favorite players, but the Bears defense is just in shambles. They're transitioning to a 3-4 with Vic Fangio. They don't have the personnel to play a 3-4. So they're in this weird transition period, and they just cut one of their best defensive players, a cornerback, in Tim Jennings because he didn't fit the scheme. They're trying to play Jared Allen as an outside linebacker. It's just going to be a mess. So I think the Packers are going to be one of the heavier owned offenses as a whole. It'll be interesting to see. Last year they were very concentrated among 4 players: Cobb, Nelson, Lacy, Rodgers. Will Devontae Adams be that 4th player and fully replace Jordy Nelson, or will that get spread out amongst the other 2 guys, Cobb and Lacy? But yeah, I'll have a lot more Lacy than I'd normally like to have because it's a very good matchup for the Packers running game.
Yeah, and this is a game that there's going to be a lot of people that are targeting. As far as like the non-primetime games, this is the highest scoring game according to Vegas. So definitely going to be looking forward to this. And week 1 is always interesting to see kind of what people's predictions are. You don't really know, and so you have to kind of go off of what you have seen a little bit in the preseason, what have been in the past. Andrew, how do you kind of gauge as far as like going into week 1 without any like large sample size of the current season?
I think you just have to understand that really none of us have any exact idea of what's going to go on. So you don't want to read too much into the preseason. There's some things you can take away, but take a cautious approach. Recognize that there's a lot of things that can change. I know in the past, last year, there were some plays that I thought were sure things. I remember Bernard Pierce for the Ravens. I had a lot of him last year. He ended up hardly playing. Weird things happen. So just be careful is the advice I would.
Yeah, as far as Ravens, we'll talk about them later. That running back situation was always weird last year, especially for DFS, because you thought you might have been getting a good cheap back, and then nope. So we're going to be the week 1 breakdown, the weekly breakdown, though. We're going to be talking about a whole variety of games, but the black games, the vanilla games, we're just going to kind of just hit a point or two and then move on. And that's what these next 2 games are. The Chiefs at the Texans, kind of a black game. Adam, I'll let you kind of touch on what you think of this game right now.
Yeah, it's a low total. And I think that, for Kansas City plays far, far better at home. I think their splits are pretty drastic in general over there in Arrowhead. So going to Houston to face a really talented defense with Watt and Clowney is back healthy and Jonathan Joseph and all those guys. It's not the best spot for Jamal Charles. It's not the best spot for Travis Kelce. I still like to have exposure to those guys because I think they're super, super talented players. But I would definitely not have a lot of Chiefs at all in this game. And I think the only one we can really consider on Houston is DeAndre Hopkins. To expect. I mean, I think he could push for the league lead in targets, especially if game script kind of gets behind on the Texans. So, yeah, maybe a little bit of Hopkins, but there's a lot of guys in that kind of 7,000 to 8,000 range that I like on DraftKings, and Hopkins is just one of them. So it's tough to get a lot of him in this spot.
And as far as the running back situation, Drew, in Houston, obviously Arian Foster not playing. What do you kind of see there playing out in week 1?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will gravitate towards Alfred Blue. That we saw last year when Foster was out, we saw heavy workloads from those Texans backs. I think the question is, will it be solely Blue leading the charge, or will Jonathan Grimes kind of be involved as well? And if they're going to be splitting carries, much less appealing situation. They're both cheap, and that will certainly draw some attention. But if they're going to be splitting carries, it would be a much less enticing situation to take advantage of. If one guy is named the starter, I think you will see people funnel towards them because of the low price points.
All right, let's move on. Andrew, I'm going to let you talk about probably the ugliest game of the slate, and that is the Browns at the Jets. Not even 40-point total, according to Vegas. So just give us something. Give us like a little nugget or something from this game.
There's not a whole lot to give you. I think I'm personally going to be avoiding the game. You could maybe look to Chris Ivory. I think that he's probably going to have a good year, but it's not the greatest matchup, and I think you just stay away from the game.
That's your nugget, is to stay away.
Ringing endorsement.
You've basically guaranteed. We have basically guaranteed like a 60-point shootout then in this game for week one. That's always fun to see, especially with the daily aspect when you start thinking about like the seasonal side, who really breaks out in week one. Well, the daily side, like you don't get those numerous weeks to kind of be right. Like you've got to be right on week one. So seeing how that plays out will be interesting. But I'm not even going to ask anybody else about any other nuggets of that game. We're just going to move right on to the Colts and Bills. And Adam, let me know what you think of this game.
I like this spot for the Bills. I mean, everybody wants to be on the Colts. Everybody wants to be on offense. Everybody wants to be on Andrew Luck. The Buffalo Bills were the toughest team for opposing quarterbacks last year in the entire NFL, and playing at the Ralph, I think, is a huge advantage for them. It's also a game that's going to be up in pace, and I like that for the Bills. I obviously am really high on Tyrod Taylor. I've been talking about him on Twitter for the last month. If you watch him play, he really does run and move like Michael Vick. And I know they both went to Virginia Tech, and everybody always makes that comparison, but it's really true if you watch them. I think 6 rushing attempts is the absolute floor for Tyrod Taylor in this game. I think he could get as many as 10 rushing attempts, and with his ability, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he ran for 50 yards, and if he gets a touchdown, that's just the cherry on top at stone minimum price. So I'm going to have Tyrod Taylor in cash, a lot of them. You guys might think I'm crazy, but I'm all Tyrod Taylored up this week in all formats.
Drew, your thoughts on Tyrod Taylor? Because that's I feel like quarterback is the big issue in this game.
Yeah, I like Tyrod Taylor quite a bit as well. Minimum price tag is what really draws you in. And Adam mentioned it, the ability to use his legs creates a nice floor compared to other quarterbacks. If you get 30, 40 rushing yards, that's an extra 75 to 100 passing yards that you're really throwing on top of, a normal in-the-pocket quarterback in terms of projection. So I do like Tyrod Taylor a lot. I do think the Bills' defense is sneaky for tournaments as well, because people aren't going to want to pick on Andrew Luck at all. But he has been turnover-prone throughout his career. And the Bills' defense, as Adam alluded to, is very, very good.
Andrew, what are your thoughts about the wide receiver options in this game, mainly on the Colts side?
T.Y. Hilton's always a good GPP play. And Andre Johnson had a pretty nice preseason. He caught a pass. Either one of those guys is liable to go off at any time with Andrew Luck and a center. I kind of like Andrew Luck. I think people are going to shy away from him. Just a quick thought about Tyrod Taylor. Typically, it's really tough to win these big tournaments unless you're able to get a monster performance from your quarterback. So while he could be a good cash game play, I'm not sure he's got enough upside to really take it home in the Millie Maker, so I'll probably be staying away from him, especially since he'll be a sexy cheap play. But I do like looking to Luck because he can put up points on anybody, even in tough spots like at Buffalo. And I think people will mostly be looking to Aaron Rodgers or some of those other guys for the more expensive plays, and they might overlook Luck here.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit right now. And here's the reason why. Because you have so many seasonal players coming into daily. And when you look at people that came from their season-long draft, Andrew Luck was the number one quarterback most of the times taken off the board. So I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Luck. But that's just me thinking outside our little DFS bubble, Wiggins. Don't take any offense to that. But Adam, can you please tell Andrew he's wrong?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the general public is getting sharper. Like if you ask 10 guys at a bar, like, is the Buffalo defense good against quarterbacks? I think 8 would say, yeah, even if they don't play DFS. So I don't know. Maybe I give the general public more credit than they deserve. I don't know.
You definitely do. But the people watching the video are sharp. That was just like, that's obviously, if you're watching this right now, you're doing a very smart thing. So yeah, as far as this game, Drew, anything else you want to kind of chime in?
Yeah, I would just say I disagree with Andrew on Tyrod's upside. I think anytime you've got a running quarterback, you've got big upside because you can get those rushing touchdowns and you can potentially get, a long rushing touchdown with how explosive he is specifically. So I think this spot is pretty similar to a few years ago when Terrell Pryor started for the Raiders against the Colts in Indianapolis and put up a big week 1. I think there could be that opportunity for Tyrod as well.
It's an interesting comparison. I'm not sure how comfortable we should be with that comparison. So we'll just.
It worked out that 1 week, and that's all we care about in DFS.
All the poor people watching the show are going to have all this Tyrod Taylor. I'll play block. Thank you.
You can reach Adam Levitan and Drew Dinkmeyer at their Twitter handles for when things go terribly wrong, or Andrew Wiggins when they go terribly right. All right, let's move on to the next game. Dolphins at Redskins. You've got Miami, a decent favorite, but again, not a great game. Quarterback situation was obviously kind of the story in the offseason with Washington. Talk to me about this game, Andrew.
Well, you got Kirk Cousins in there who, while we're on the theme of cheap quarterbacks, I think he could have a decent game himself. It's not a great spot, but he's a guy that no one's going to have as a cheap quarterback. They're going to be thrown. I don't love him, but I could potentially consider him. You could look to Jordan Reed at tight end. He's another cheap option. He's been a little banged up, but he seems to be healthy now. And he's been able to put up some big numbers with Kirk Cousins in the past. So I kind of like him. And then Deshaun Jackson is like the GPP play. When you look it up in the dictionary, it's Deshaun Jackson. So he can always have that 2 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I always like playing him in tournaments.
Adam, what about the Miami side? You have Tannehill, who a lot of people thought, as far as going into this season and with the season-long stuff, that he could be like a top 10 quarterback, possibly even top 5, like upside, and he's gotten better every year. Talk to me about this Dolphins offense.
Yeah, I like Tannehill, and I think he doesn't give the same kind of rushing upside that Tyrod Taylor does, but he is underrated as an athlete. I think 20 rushing yards is a fair projection every week for Ryan Tannehill, which raises his floor. I think they upgraded their weaponry this year. I know Devontae Parker is questionable for week 1, but I think getting rid of Greg Jennings and Mike Wallace and bringing in Kenny Stills and Devontae Parker and Jordan Cameron to go with Jarvis Landry, I think there's an upgrade there. Traditionally, or at least last year, the way you attack the Redskins is through the air, not on the ground. And I think that'll be the same way it is this year, even though they were able to get David Amerson out of their starting lineup and go with guys like D'Angelo Hall and Brashad Breeland. I think that their secondary is weak enough to the point that we can pick on them. So I definitely have Tannehill circled. I think he's a fine mid-range play. I prefer Bradford or Matt Ryan if I'm going mid-range at quarterback, but I think Tannehill to Landry stacks are popular, and for good reason. I mean, Landry just fits so well with Tannehill. Tannehill likes to kind of dink and dunk underneath, and obviously that's where Landry wins. So, yeah, definitely Landry and Tannehill are on my board, and people were tweeting at me that they like Lamar Miller. On paper, it doesn't make that much sense because the Redskins are so good against the run, but like we've been talking about, we don't know for sure. Like maybe the Redskins will be really bad against the run this year, and then you'll have Lamar Miller at a cheap price at a low ownership. So there's definitely some merit to that, I think.
Drew, any sleepers in this game for you?
I think the Dolphins defense might be one. I think everybody around that price range is going to gravitate towards the Jets defense because I think they'll be the highest owned defense. But the Dolphins are going up against Kirk Cousins, who since 2013 of any quarterback with 46 pass attempts has the highest turnover rate of any quarterback in the league. And historically, when you adjust for eras, has one of the highest turnover rates of any quarterback to ever play the game. So I think that the Dolphins defense that is revamped with Makisupa is a good spot to potentially get some sneaky tournament separation.
Look at you dropping little stat nuggets. We got to step our game up, Drew. Just like nonchalant, just drop that in. You can tell he'd been practicing. All right. Go ahead, Drew. What'd you want?
I was just gonna say, those stat nuggets, they come, in videos off the charts every week with your Dinkmeyer.
Ding! There's your DKTV plug. Well done. All right, so we talked about some blah games and then covered some interesting games. Now let's back to the blah, and then we'll get to the good stuff. I promise. But two bad games: Panthers at Jags, and this game just screams stay away for most people. Do you agree, Adam?
There's one guy, and I think that with Julius Thomas out, Allen Robinson, who I already had projected to be among the league leaders in targets this year, I think Allen Robinson is going to see a ton of targets. I mean, I could see 9 or more in this game, especially if the Jags get behind, and especially in the red zone where they were counting on Julius Thomas to be so effective. I think Allen Robinson will be a primary target there. Unique athlete, and I think a special player. So definitely going to have some Allen Robinson in my GPPs. Not a ton of him, but that's about the only place I'm looking in this game.
Yeah, the thing about a red zone targets is that you actually have to get to the red zone, which I think might be the issue. Cam Newton obviously doesn't have a lot of weapons, but you talk about the rushing upside. Andrew, your thoughts on Cam Newton this week? Is like, this is a guy that in tournaments, you might not have to stack him with anyone just because he might get all the points himself.
Yeah, and he actually finished the year pretty strong last year. If you remember at the beginning of the season, he was pretty banged up. They weren't letting him run much. And that's where he gets his value, when he's running, when he's punching in touchdowns himself. His receiving core is obviously a mess right now. They're saying that Funchess isn't even going to start. So he had looked like he might be a good option, but I'm going to scale back on him. That leaves Greg Olsen, who I think is going to get peppered with targets. So I think if you're going to look to stack someone with Cam, put him with Olsen. And I think they're both pretty good options, actually.
Yeah, and Drew, it seems like Olsen is going to be a guy that just may not lead the league in targets for tight ends, but might come close because he's legit the only threat that they have right now.
Yeah, and I think for the Sunday and Monday slates, I think he'll be the highest owned tight end. You remove Gronk from the equation on the Thursday games, and I think you funnel exposure towards Greg Olsen. And I agree with what Andrew said about Cam Newton. I think he's a really intriguing tournament play in the spot. That rushing upside is significant. We talked about with Tyrod Taylor. He's one of the few quarterbacks that could go out there and get 30, 35 fantasy points by mostly using his legs. And this Jacksonville defense, while not as bad as most people think, is vulnerable. This game flow should be kept pretty close, and I think that's going to lean on Cam's legs, especially in the red zone, because they really don't have a lot of other options.
Let me ask you guys, who, Martellus Bennett or Greg Olsen, if you had to pick one, regardless of price, because that's something I'm struggling with in my lineups.
Yeah, for me, regardless of price, I'd lean Olsen, but I do think the price gap between the two makes it a much tougher decision.
And the ownership, too. Olsen, like Drew said, is going to be a lot heavier on. But they're both very good options this week that are both going to get a bunch of targets.
Yeah, Olsen for me as well. Going into this next game, Seahawks at Rams, just the 3 or 4 ugly games that we have reminds me of one thing that's great about DraftKings, and that is no kickers. Because a lot of these games, you see just maybe it's the field goal kicker that gets all of the points, and we don't have to worry about that. We can play defenses, and that's it. Don't have to worry about anything else. Seahawks and Rams might be a defense that you want to use in there, Andrew.
I think the Seahawks are a decent play, although generally I try and shy away from them, using them on the road. And the Rams defense you could consider. The Seahawks were pretty awful in the preseason. I mentioned earlier I don't like to read too much into that, but I believe that Russell Wilson, did he not throw a touchdown, I think was the case. So that's a little alarming, but I think they'll get it going. And if I were to pick one of them, it would probably be the Seahawks.
Drew, let's talk about running game in this game. Anyone that you're particularly interested in?
The reports on Todd Gurley probably not participating in this game makes Trey Mason sort of interesting in a tournament sense, because he's not particularly expensive, and the Seahawks D is one that people just gravitate away from in general. But, as Andrew mentioned, they're typically a lot stronger at home. This is a road game. The game's expected to be pretty close. So I think Mason could be an interesting contrarian GPP play, because I think ownership will be exceptionally low on him. Marshawn's a guy that I think the ownership might outpace the actual projection. So he's a guy I'm a little bit lighter on. He's a guy that I really prefer taking at home, just in general as well.
It's probably worth noting that Trey's a game time decision right now, so you could have Benny Cunningham come into the mix there, but it really looks like just something to avoid, given that we might not know. And even if Trey goes, he might not play a lot, so it's kind of a tough spot there.
Yeah, and just looking at last year, I guess it was one of the last weeks, you had Trey Mason, Benny Cunningham, Zach Stacy, like they combined for 42 rushing yards against this. Like it's not something you want to target. So we'll just move on from there. Adam, not even going to ask your opinion on this game because I'm going to get you on the next game, and that is Saints at Cardinals. There have been some offseason moves and also questions about the running back situation, questions about Drew Brees. Does he still have it? Obviously, the wide receivers there. No Jimmy Graham. A lot of offseason stuff. What is your kind of overall take on this game?
Yeah, I'm worried about the Saints in general. I mean, look at what they did in the offseason. They got rid of Jimmy Graham. They got rid of Kenny Stills. They spent a bunch of money and draft capital on the offensive line. They spent a bunch of money on Mark Ingram. I think they want to run the ball. They want to reduce the points that they need to win. Now, are they going to be able to do that when they're fielding such an atrocious defense or what I think will be a pretty bad defense? We'll see. So that's kind of the balancing act. I'm not sure if they'll be able to do what they want to do. If the Saints are forced to throw in this game, we know where it's going. I mean, Marquez Colston is 1 foot in the grave, and Ben Watson is starting at tight end. I mean, it's going to Brandon Cooks, and it's going to Brandon Cooks a lot. So I definitely like him. He's right there in that Jordan Matthews, DeAndre Hopkins range where I kind of like all of those guys. But I think the best play from this game is John Brown, kind of a buzzy second-year player out of Arizona, and with Michael Floyd dealing with a hand injury and no Keenan Lewis for the Saints, it just sets up really, really nicely for John Brown in this spot. So definitely going to have a lot of him.
Drew?
Yeah, John Brown's a guy that I like a lot in this spot. And Adam also mentioned Brandon Cooks, I think, is going to be an interesting tournament target as well. A lot of people like to shy away from Patrick Peterson. They think he's, one of these elite cornerbacks. And statistically, he's not really an elite cornerback. And he tends to struggle with kind of shifty, small, quick guys, which is really what Brandon Cooks does. Cooks also kind of moves all over the formation. So I don't think he'll necessarily be lined up against Peterson the whole time. So I think he's an interesting tournament play as well. But I agree with Adam that John Brown's probably my favorite play from this game. And then I think Carson Palmer has some tournament winning upside as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing as far as Palmer goes. If you get a healthy Palmer, it's a lot different than that offense without Palmer last year, which was pretty bad and scared away a lot of people off of those Arizona receivers. So I know that there's a few times that a lot of people got burned by those receivers. So hopefully John Brown can be one of those guys that comes through for you this week. Let's move on to Lions at Chargers. Chargers, home game and 3-point favorites. Andrew, your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, so Melvin Gordon's a guy that's been touted a lot coming in, but he didn't have the greatest preseason. And Danny Woodhead seems to be healthy. He's one of those guys that's always hanging around. He's a good player. He's good in the PPR format, and his price is cheap on DraftKings. So I like him. He's probably one of my favorite plays. And then Keenan Allen also is another guy who had a good camp and good preseason. So I think with Gates being gone, he could get a few more targets, and there's a good spot for him to potentially succeed.
Adam, as far as this game goes on the Lions side, one name in the offseason, rookie Amir Abdullah, has really kind of stuck out. What do you see from him?
Yeah, I was obviously upset that he broke off that run against the Jets because everybody saw it and it was a great run, but it's going to send his ownership up. And that's something that I'm concerned with, especially if Joique Bell is going to play in this game. And I haven't heard anything yet on Joique Bell's status. He was trending towards being ready for this game, but we don't know for sure. So in terms of a touch projection for Amir Abdullah, if Joique Bell is healthy, I'd be hard to give him more than 10 or 12 in this spot. So that's tough for me given his ownership percentage is going to be through the roof at only 4,000, I believe, on DraftKings.
Yeah, Drew, as far as like game time decisions go, and obviously there's a lot on the line, is this one of the game time decisions that you're looking at the most?
It's hard to say because I want to have some exposure to Abdullah, especially if Joy Bell is out. But as Adam said, if Bell is in, it's hard to kind of garner that enthusiasm for a 10 to 12 touch role when expected ownership will probably be high. This is one of the games that I think is most interesting in terms of tournaments because I think if you can figure out the right side of it and the right players, I think most of the players in this game are going to come with lower ownership because I think the defenses are just kind of good enough that you tend to shy away. And I think the offensive players, nobody stands out individually. So I think most of the guys in this game outside of Abdullah that don't have a lot of preseason hype are going to come with lower ownership. So I think if you can hit it right, I think there's a big opportunity in this one.
Yeah, Calvin comes to mind as somebody that was super healthy for the first time in a lot of recent off seasons. Just super healthy for Calvin, and he's going to be really low owned, I think, as people go to Julio and Dez and Beckham and those guys.
Yeah, he's kind of been bypassed with these injuries as the must-own guy, which is, 2 or 3 years ago, he was that guy that you wanted to own. So I agree that he is flying under the radar this year. The next game, a battle of two rookie quarterbacks. You've got the Titans, 3-point underdogs at Tampa Bay, Mariota versus Winston. You've got this game is just like full of young studs, it seems like, Drew.
Yeah, I like this game to target. I like the Tampa Bay side a little bit more than the Tennessee side. Playing at home, I think Tampa Bay's defense is a little bit better than people give it credit for. It got really banged up towards the end of last year, and then they've had these issues where they've kind of quit on coaches in past years, not necessarily last year, but that's kind of given them this perception as a really weak defense. So I think they're interesting, and I really like Winston, especially if Mike Evans is healthy. That's something we're going to have to continue to monitor throughout the week. But a Winston Mike Evans stack I think is really interesting, and then Doug Martin was kind of the darling of the preseason. His resurgence back to being that muscle hamster that everybody got excited in his rookie year. He's got a nice cheap price tag. I think he'll be one of those players that people gravitate towards as well.
Adam, you just gave a look when he mentioned Doug Martin.
Yeah.
Does that mean that
I don't know. I don't know what it means, but I want to fade him. I'll say that because Doug Martin has been one of the worst running backs in the league the last 2 years in terms of both running and pass protection. And the Bucs, I think, have one of the worst offensive lines in the league right there with the Rams. It's just completely putrid. That said, like Drew said, he looked great in the preseason. And if he can find that rookie year form, it's obviously the spot to do it against Tennessee. I know I've been talking to Al about his thoughts on week one, Al Smizzle, obviously, and he absolutely loves Doug Martin. And I don't know. I'm afraid to have completely fade Doug Martin, but I feel like pulling the trigger on it because I think he's going to be pretty high owned at such a low price.
Yeah, and talk about like preseason. He did really well in the preseason, and people obviously pay attention to that. One thing to kind of keep in mind, though, Andrew, is like the game flow. Like, how do you see this game script working out? Tennessee in the past has got down early, or last season got down early and had to pass more. What do you see kind of in that game script for this upcoming week?
Generally, probably be a pretty sloppy game with maybe not a lot of offensive scoring. I do like the Bucs for defensive play, and just one thought on Doug Martin is, regardless of how he looked in the preseason, he looked good. It's that he seems to be the man right now, so he's going to be getting the touches, so that's important. And then the guy that we haven't mentioned here is Vincent Jackson. Mike Evans is looking very iffy for the game, and Winston was looking to V-Jax in the preseason, so I think that he could get a lot of targets. He's always been a good GPP play. He's a guy that I'm really going to be looking to, especially if Evans is not playing.
And on the Titans side, you also had another PPR monster that could break out this year, and that's Kendall Wright, getting a lot of targets. Looks like Mariota's boy, so a GPP play, probably not a cash game play. Let's take a look at the Bengals. Drew? How do you say that? Bengals or Bengals?
Bengals.
That's
Was
what
that
I
one
thought.
of the options?
I definitely said Bengals. I thought I would go to you as the guy that sometimes
The pronunciation aficionado here.
has trouble with the pronunciation. So yeah, let's take a look at the Bengals and the Raiders. As far as like the Raiders and the Bengals, you've got the wide receiver core as far as Amari Cooper, AJ Green, and you also have Jeremy Hill. What are some of the overall takes that you have from this game?
So I think it's going to be an interesting game because I think Adam's talked a lot about this during the course of the preseason. A lot of people think of Oakland and they think, okay, take your running backs against Oakland because they're such a bad team. The game script's always so favorable. But the Vegas line here is really tight. You know, the Bengals are just, I believe, 3-point favorites, pretty small favorites. And it'll be interesting to see. I think Andy Dalton and AJ Green are always a fun tournament stack. It's one that's won a couple people millions of dollars in the past, surprisingly, because Dalton tends to do well in favorable matchups and he tends to stat pad a little bit towards the red zone as well. So I think there'll be an interesting contrarian tournament stack. I think it'll be really interesting to see where Hill's ownership falls because he's right around CJ Anderson, Eddie Lacy, Adrian Peterson in terms of pricing on DraftKings. And I can't get a good read if that's going to push the ownership down or if people are going to love the matchup with Jeremy Hill so much. And he was such a key player down the stretch for a lot of people that the ownership will remain high. That's what I'm trying to kind of get my handle on heading into this week.
Yeah. Adam, he's kind of like in that low. It's like he's in the first tier, but he's in the low first tier. So you might even have to consider him a top of the second tier.
Yeah, and I actually think that Jeremy Hill will be the most owned running back this week. And maybe that's aggressive, but if you open up DraftKings and you go to make a lineup, it says it right there. Oakland 32nd against the run in bright green. And Jeremy Hill is 7,100. You get some savings on guys like Adrian Peterson. I don't know. Like, I think it's a great spot for Jeremy Hill. I just think that his ownership is going to be completely through the roof, and maybe the Raiders like show up big in this game. It's like they have been doing better with acquiring talent over the last couple of years, and maybe this is the time they're actually ready. But I say that like every year. Every year I'm like, this is the year that the Jaguars are ready. Then I'm like, no, this is the year that the Raiders are ready. Like, I love these bad teams. So maybe I'm overreacting, but I'm not gonna I'm gonna be underexposed to the field on Jeremy Hill. I'm not going to completely fade him, but I will be underexposed. I'm going to be overexposed on AJ Green, though. I think that he's just going to completely tear apart these atrocious Raiders cornerbacks.
Yeah, and Andrew, 2 years ago, the first DraftKings millionaire was won by a Bengals stack, and AJ Green was a part of that. Do you see maybe that kind of coming into play this week?
AJ Green, he's always kind of the forgotten man. I'm not really sure why, but people always tend to underdraft him. Actually, I think was that the year against the Bears when he scored a few touchdowns. I remember a week one. I don't know if we were quite at the Millie Maker size yet, but I remember AJ torching Tillman for 2 touchdowns early in the game, and I didn't have any of them. But yeah,
you want to talk about it?
The other guy that there's been a lot of hype about has been Amari Cooper, and he's not a guy I'm going to be looking to week one. They didn't connect. Not only did he not connect for any touchdowns, but David Carr didn't throw any touchdowns in the preseason. So while he's an incredibly talented guy, I'm awfully concerned about the situation there. It's not a great matchup. I'm going to stay away from him, but I do think people might own him just because of all the hype there.
All right. We've been serving you some appetizers. Now let's get to the main meal, and those are these last 4 games. It's going to be a fun late Sunday afternoon / Monday with these good games in DFS. And probably going to be a lot of people that get their hopes up the first part of the game or the first part of the day, as far as I'm winning $1 million, and you have to fade a lot of people. So just pro tip as far as to those people sweating games, don't get overly excited after the first round of games because there's still a lot to be played. I think that's one lesson we've all learned the hard way. All right, let's take a look at the Ravens and the Broncos at Denver. Adam, your thoughts on this game?
I'm worried for the Ravens offense in this spot. I mean, think about their skill position players. I mean, Steve Smith, I've buried him a lot before. I think I'm burying him for real this year after the second half that he had. Opposite him is going to be Kamar Aiken with Rashad Perriman still not ready. At tight end, Max Williams was so unimpressive in the preseason that they're going to go with Crockett Gilmore, the number 3 receiver. Is Marlon Brown. The running back is Justin Forsett, who came out of nowhere to have a great year last year, but he's on the wrong side of 30 and been a career journeyman. So to go into Denver for kind of a frenzied week 1 environment, that scares me. And I have a lot of CJ Anderson Denver correlation stacks in my lineups. I think that Emmanuel Sanders and the defense and the Broncos defense is an interesting play, considering Emmanuel Sanders is going to be returning punts. So yeah, I like the spot for the Broncos. I think on our first DKTV segment, I picked the Broncos to go to the Super Bowl. So it shouldn't be a surprise that I think they're going to show up big in this game.
Drew, thoughts on this Broncos offense?
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the Broncos offense, what they showed in the preseason. Peyton Manning struggled quite a bit during the preseason. I think, as Adam alluded to, this is a spot where they might be able to just get away with dominating with the run game and with their defense and kind of just let them get through another week, kind of conserving bullets from Peyton Manning. Obviously, Peyton Manning and Demaryius Thomas is a historically very popular tournament stack. I think it's one that I probably will be underweight this week because I'm more focused on the C.J. Anderson side and potentially the defensive side as well.
Yeah, and you've got Demaryius Thomas, who is just extremely expensive, and he has to do a lot in this offense to pay off that price tag. Andrew, are you concerned about Peyton Manning's noodle arm?
Not really. I think them missing Emmanuel Sanders for most of the preseason was a big problem. He's hopefully going to be back and healthy. So I think that'll help get things clicking again. It's a tough run matchup for CJ, so I could see him running a lot, but I think they'll be throwing it too. I could see dump offs to him. I think Emmanuel will have a nice game. I'm just not going to get overly concerned about what we saw in the preseason. I think they'll find their rhythm, and I think they're all pretty good plays. But, Demaryius, I don't really agree with you. I don't think he'll be that heavily owned as far as the stack there. So I might be looking to it because you got Julio Jones. We're going to get to that game in a second, but he's hardly more expensive. And there's a couple other plays there. To me, seem like sexier plays that people might just not be looking DT's way.
All right, let's move. Let's transition to a sexy game. I love the word sexy, Andrew. I'm glad that you use it as well. So let's move on to the sexy Sunday night game with the Giants and the Cowboys, and a lot of, Andrew, sexy options going on. Adam, your take on this game?
I mean, this game on paper should be, if not the highest scoring game of the week, one of them. The Giants secondary was bad coming in, suffered some serious preseason injuries. The Cowboys, I think, defense played way over their head last year and was also able to control the clock with a run game. I don't think they'll be able to do that this year with DeMarco Murray. So, yeah, I mean, just like everybody in this game, you can't name a guy in this game that I don't like. I think one guy that's maybe flying under the radar is Rashad Jennings. Everybody wants to talk about Andre Williams. I don't think Andre Williams can really play. Just gets hit behind the line of scrimmage so often, and everybody says, wait till Andre Williams gets into the open field and starts bowling people over. But he's never in the open field because he can't get 2 yards down the field. I think Rashad Jennings is a better all-around back, especially for a Giants team that wants to play faster. So I think Rashad Jennings at a low ownership is a guy that I'm going to have. And with the news kind of coming out this week that Victor Cruz hasn't run in 3 weeks, I expect Ruben Randle to play 100% of the snaps. I obviously expect Odell Beckham to get a ton of attention, and that'll leave Ruben Randle, I think, 8, 9, 10 targets for Ruben Randle against a really bad secondary with no Orlando Scandrick would not surprise me at all in this spot.
Yeah, Drew, let's talk about these two top receivers with Dez Bryant and Odell Beckham. Your take on these two elite receivers. Obviously, Beckham is 500 more than Dez Bryant, which just kind of goes to show you how crazy football can be. Because if you would have said that last year, you'd been crazy. So your take, though, on these top two receivers, though.
Yeah, I like them both, and I have a strong affinity to both. They were both in my Millionaire Maker lineup when I was able to win, and I think they'll be popular again this week.
Wow.
Tony Romo, just dropping that in there. Tony Romo to Dez, I think, will be a popular tournament stack. I like the Cowboys passing game a lot this year for a number of reasons. You take DeMarco Murray away, and I don't think they'll be as efficient running the ball, even though that offensive line is great. I think that's going to neutralize the effects of kind of their balance last year. They were so run heavy. And I think they'll also play into games that get into a little bit more shootouts, a little bit faster tempo, because they won't be able to control the tempo as much. So I really like Dez Bryant a lot in this game. I think Tony Romo's a good play. And then Beckham, the best wide receiver in football last year in fantasy purposes. You take away Orlando Scandrick, the best cover corner that the Cowboys have, and they're very thin in that secondary. So I think they're both great options.
And yes, you did drop that in rather nicely. I like Odell Beckham. I'm a millionaire. Dez Bryant, good option too.
Drew has more money. Drew has more money than Odell and Dez.
All right. This next game, Monday night game, the first. This is what's great about week one is that you have two Monday night games, the early game and the late game. So again, lots of sweats, and we'll be sweating live from Miami on Monday night. Make sure you're turning into DKTV for that. But you've got Philly and Atlanta, and lots of options in this game, lots of snaps. Lots of fantasy goodness, or as Andrew would say, sexiness. So, Andrew, I'll let you kind of start this game off.
Yeah, I think this is the game that most people – it's going to be the most drafted of any game in the Million Maker. There are just so many plays. People see the high over-under. It's the Monday night game, so people like waiting until that. It's in a dome. There's a lot going for it. I think Sam Bradford is probably going to be the heaviest owned guy, stacking him with Jordan Matthews. They're cheap. It gives you options elsewhere. Sam Bradford looked great in that third preseason game. I think he was perfect 11 for 11 with 3 touchdowns, which is pretty amazing. I also think Julio Jones is going to be very heavily owned, him and Matt Ryan as a stack, especially since Roddy White is banged up. We're not quite sure what's going to happen there. For a guy that's a little bit more off the radar, Hankerson, even if he's starting, I just don't see him being all that heavily owned, and he's a guy that could put some points up on the board. So you really can't go too wrong with most of the players in this game.
Adam, will let you kind of weigh in, being in Philly. What you think of this game?
Yeah, so I have 100% Julio in cash right now, and I know that's chalky. He's the most expensive wide out. I just think it sets up so perfectly with Levine Toilolo, I hope I'm saying that right, at tight end, who's just like a lumbering 6'9" guy. On the opposite side, Roddy White is not healthy. I do like Leonard Hankerson, but I'm not sure how much trust there is between him and Matt Ryan right now. I don't think that they'll be able to run the ball against an underrated Eagles front. Benny Logan and Fletcher Cox and Kendricks and Kiko Alonso and all these guys in the Eagles front seven is actually underrated. So obviously, the way you attack the Eagles is through the air, and even though I expect Julio to see a lot of Byron Maxwell, that's a matchup that I think Julio can win pretty easily. So, yeah, just all the Julio for me on the Atlanta side. And on the Philly side, I think DeMarco Murray is flying under the radar, and I can use Julio and DeMarco Murray in correlation because if the Eagles get ahead, which I expect them to do, that DeMarco Murray will be running the football, and then when Atlanta gets the ball, they'll obviously be throwing it, and when they throw it, they'll be throwing it to Julio. So DeMarco and Julio are definitely two core plays for me.
Drew, do you agree about DeMarco? Because he's definitely interesting in that Philly offense. A few other options there, but do you agree that he's a relatively safe option in this offense for week one?
I think the offense as a whole is safe from a rushing perspective, but I think there's uncertainty around how those carries are going to get split up between DeMarco Murray, Ryan Matthews, and then Darren Sproles will steal some snaps, probably not many carries, but steal some snaps at that running back position as well. So I do think he's flying under the radar because of those reasons, and I think he's a great tournament play because of those reasons. He's probably a little bit further down on my list of cash game plays. Eddie Lacy and CJ Anderson, guys that you're more stable roles that you feel good about the workload that they're going to get. I think Murray has that opportunity and has a better matchup than those guys, perhaps as good of a matchup as Lacy. But I do think the uncertainty around the workload pushes him down my stability rankings a little bit, but an excellent tournament play. Totally agree with Adam on that.
You know how I got off Lacy in cash because obviously I had Devontae Adams, and I'm sure you guys have Devontae Adams in cash too, and I didn't want to have Devontae and Lacy. Do you think that's a mistake?
Are you really concerned about the Packers not being able to score enough against the Bears?
I don't know.
It's a Bears fan. I'm not concerned about that at all.
Yeah, I know, but it's like a terrible correlation, is it not?
Well,
in the cash game, I'm not as concerned about correlations. I'm just concerned as trying to put the lineup that has the best floor out there for me. And I figure if the Packers are going to put up 4 or 5 touchdowns and I have Lacy and Adams combined, I'm probably locking myself in for 2 or 3 of those.
Okay.
Yeah. In cash games, I think it's okay. Go ahead, Andrew.
Are you ready for James Jones to catch 3 touchdowns?
Oh, that would be so tilting.
Yeah. In cash games, I think it's okay. In tournaments, we did actually see some quarterback, wide receiver, running back combos last year, which typically in the past we've said stay away from. Don't put your running back in your stacks. But last year we saw some of those win $1 million. So this would be definitely an offense as far as the Philly offense that I could see that happening again this season. but his cash, yeah, it's okay. Don't be concerned.
But the other thing to keep in mind is the game is so much bigger this year too, the Millie Maker, that I think it makes it even harder because you really need things to break your way to have the quarterback and a receiver running back and a receiver from the same team for them to put up enough points and to beat 580,000 other people. So I just wouldn't do it in this game.
Tips from Andrew Wiggins. Let's move on to the final game, Minnesota and San Francisco. And in the past, this might have been a game that you would want to stay away from, but things have changed this year, Adam.
Yeah, San Francisco lost about 40% of their defensive starter snaps from last year. I think they're a shell of themselves, and we've seen that reflected in the line move. It opened 4, and then it went across a key number down to 2. So anytime a line crosses a key number like 3 is obviously the most important number in football. That makes me raise my eyebrows. It's going towards the Vikings. So I have no problem with a lot of the Adrian Petersons. I know there's a lot of people out there that are afraid of Adrian Peterson because he crossed this 30-year-old barrier. I think that's just one small piece of the puzzle. The other bigger pieces of the puzzle for Adrian Peterson, for me, are a Hall of Fame talent in a scheme that is ideal for high-level running back production, and in a game that I think the Vikings are going to win. And even though I hate using running backs on the road, I think I'm going to make an exception for Peterson here.
And Drew, talking about like the sweat show, Adrian Peterson's going to be highly owned. He might very well be the guy that determines someone being a millionaire or not being a millionaire. Like, he's the guy you see like making or breaking possible teams that last game of the night.
Yeah, I think when we're on air on Monday night, we're going to be focusing on an Adrian Peterson team, either trying to move up and catch someone from behind. I think that's the most likely player that we're going to be sweating. There's some other interesting options from this game. I think Teddy Bridgewater might be a guy that goes kind of under-owned, second-year quarterback, expected to take a nice leap forward in a very friendly offense for quarterbacks as well, because Adam mentioned it's so friendly for high-end running backs, but that sets up a lot of play action for the quarterbacks as well. And he's got nice pieces around him with Kyle Rudolph, Charles Johnson, Mike Wallace, much better pieces than he had last year. So I think he'll be an interesting option as well. And then Charles Johnson, he's a guy that I've talked about a lot during the preseason, a guy that I really like as a breakout player this year. I think this is an interesting opportunity for you to get him at a reasonable price point before he potentially ascends, kind of like what we saw with Odell Beckham last year, where if you were early on, you were getting him at incredible price points. Charles Johnson may not have Odell Beckham's upside, but I think this is an opportunity early in the season where you might get him at a more favorable price point than you do 3, 4, 5 weeks from now.
And Andrew, I'm going to put you in a situation. The last kind of question, the last game, you are, let's say, 3rd or 4th place, but the guy in 2nd or 1st place has Adrian Peterson in the flex. You have to switch to one person, not Adrian Peterson. Hey, you have to late swap in the flex. Who is that guy for you?
Ooh, that's a tough choice. It's quite a drop-off. I was going to say I don't really like any of the offensive players in this game except for Adrian Peterson. Probably Charles Johnson for the reasons that Drew stated. I do like him quite a bit. I just don't think it's that great of a spot, even though San Francisco defense is quite a bit worse this year. They're on the road. It's first game of the season. If I'm picking anyone from this game, it's going to be one of the two defenses, and I like both of them a decent amount. But, yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's going to be Charles Johnson all the way.
Yes.
I won't be happy about
it. Hopefully you get to be in that position, though. That'd be nice.
I would be happy about that, yes.
If you're in 2nd, again, you still are a millionaire. So this is going to be really exciting. I mean, literally, we're days away from this event that we have been looking forward to for quite some time. So, guys, that's it. I mean, now it's time to get in our lineups.
Yeah, exactly. You want to come make some lineups for me?
No, and Adam, you've got the podcast. You've got the Daily Fantasy Edge podcast with Peter Jennings and Al Zeidenfeld for our current DK analysts that are widely respected in the industry. We also have the DraftKings TV segments like Drew. Yours is pretty good. I've watched it. So.
Off the charts. Get that branding in there. Off the charts with your thing.
It is off the charts. So make sure you're getting those lineups in. Thanks to Andrew, Adam, and Drew. Make sure you're subscribing to DKTV, and also make sure you're tuning in on Sunday night while we're hanging out, and Monday night while we're sweating. Someone's going to walk away with $2 million, and again, second place, $1 million, and lots of other contests as well. So, guys, with that, let's get on those lineups.